everybody, it's Miss Dumas, and this quick video tutorial is about DBQ feedback. I want to show you where a student would have earned points and where a student would not have earned points on this DBQ. This is not a real student's DBQ. I kind of made one up to be able to give you guys some feedback. And so I wanted to show you the process of what I go through when I'm grading it and how you earn points and when sometimes you think you earn points, but you actually don't. And so I just want to go through this paragraph by paragraph and show you what's going on. Now, I know that you do not have your DBQs yet. They're sitting in my house because I cannot have contact with you. And I'm sure you may not remember what you wrote, but you can use this video for future feedback when you're going to write future DBQs. So let's get started. And so when I'm grading, I always start looking for historical context because that should be the first thing I see in the intro paragraph. And right here, I do see an attempt at historical context. In the late 1700s, the world began industrializing, and this radically changed the world. Now, goods were being produced by machines, not by people. Everything from textiles to weapons were being mass-produced. Now, this is a good attempt at historical context, but it wouldn't earn the point. And it wouldn't earn the point for a couple of reasons. Number one, it's a little bit too vague. The world is too vague. Radically changed the world, too vague. Produced by machines, too vague. So you need specific facts there, okay, content-rich specific facts to really drive home your point. Now, the other reason this historical context wouldn't have gotten credit comes right about here. There is no connective tissue between this historical context and the thesis statement. It's just like we're reading the historical context and then bam, here comes India and Japan with nothing to connect the two. And so had this student simply added a sentence that stated, India was forced to industrialize as a result of British control, why Japan chose to industrialize to avoid the fate of China. Had they added that last sentence, then the historical context would have worked a little bit better and they probably would have gotten credit for it. So unfortunately for this essay, there's no point for historical context. Now, the next thing I go on to look for, the second point, is thesis, because that's the next thing I should read in your essay. And this thesis actually is really, really good. Japan and India were similar in their process of cotton mechanization in terms of an increase in cotton production and working conditions. However, the nations were different when it came to the gender of the workforce. This thesis works because it includes all the key words, plus it has its three prongs that are correct. Increase in cotton production, working conditions, and a difference in the gender of the workforce. So that's outstanding. They would have earned the point for thesis. Now, as we get into the body paragraphs, now I start looking for, obviously strong topic sentences, even though you don't earn points for that. But then do your evidence, the evidence that you present, does it really support your thesis? Does it really prove what you're trying to say? Is it specific enough? And then if that's there, then I look for sourcing. So here we go. We're in the first body paragraph. Outstanding topic sentence. Way to go. Very clear. And then the evidence from document 1 is very specific, 151 million to 652 million pounds, specific enough, that would earn the point. And then I look for the next document. And the next document comes down here, right about here, and this is supported by Mukherjee, who stated that machine-made cotton increased while the amount made of hand-loomed cotton decreased. That would get it for specific evidence to support. And then the third document down here, the same happened in Japan as cotton production increased from 5 million pounds to 666 million pounds. Totally specific and totally supports thesis. Good job. So not only did the student use the documents, they also used really good evidence to support their thesis. So good job in the first paragraph. Then I go back and I look for sourcing. And I see that this student has attempted sourcing twice in this paragraph. Let me change my pen color so easier for you guys to see. So this is where sourcing number 1 starts. With this document being written by the British company, they may have exaggerated the amount of produce in order to impress the Queen or justify their presence in India. This would definitely count for purpose. They've told me what the purpose is, okay, to tell the amount of produce, okay, or amount of production, but then they've also told me why, to impress the Queen or justify their presence in India. So they've told me what the purpose is, why they had that purpose. That would count for sourcing number 1. The second sourcing comes down here, and this was after Mukherjee's evidence, and they say when Britain took control of India, they mechanized the industry. And that's true. The problem is they haven't taken this historical context and they haven't connected it back to the evidence that they used. So I would say, so what? So what? Britain took control of India. They mechanized the industry. How did that lead to an increase in machine-made cotton? So that was an attempt at historical context, but it wasn't complete because they didn't connect it back to the evidence at hand. And then I saw a third attempt at sourcing, and this one comes after the specific evidence about Japanese increased production, and it says this. One reason why Japan saw an increase was the Meiji Restoration, the westernization and industrial movement that took place in the 1880s. Once Japan began industrializing textile production, it makes sense that cotton production would increase. This would get credit for sourcing number 2, and I'll show you how it's different from the previous historical context we just talked about. Here is that specific, this part is the specific facts about the Meiji Restoration. But here is this sentence right here that ties it back to the evidence that they presented. This is what was missing in this first historical context up here. But they have it down here. They've connected it back to the evidence. They've explained the historical context. So that would absolutely get credit for sourcing number 2. So good job for them. Super proud. All right, let's go on to the next body paragraph. Another similarity between Japan and India was the mechanization of cotton was the working conditions. Outstanding topic sentence. For example, in Japan, women had to work long days with no heat and work with others who were sick with tuberculosis. That does an excellent job showing terrible working conditions. Good job. Then I look for evidence in the next document. So down here is the next document. As well, in India, wages were low and hadn't changed in years. Well, that is absolutely true, but this evidence doesn't show bad working conditions. It just shows low wages. So in order for this evidence to count, it somehow had to show bad working conditions. And because this evidence doesn't show bad working conditions, it doesn't really support the thesis. So while I can give this document credit for using it, I can't give it credit for supporting the thesis because the evidence doesn't really support bad working conditions. Okay? All right, now we're going to go on to, then I go on and I have to see if they have any sourcing. And they do. They have one sourcing. Let me change back to my blue pen here. They have one sourcing right here, a POV. And here's what they say. While this is a first-hand account of conditions in the factory, the stories were told when these girls were women. At least a decade must have passed, so there is a chance that the author remembered conditions as worse than they actually were, as time can change perspectives. That is an outstanding POV statement. They've told me what the POV is. It's a first-hand account, and they've actually told me why this POV was the way it was, because it was told a decade later, and it could have made it worse. So outstanding POV statement. This gets credit for sourcing. Good job. Now we go to the last body paragraph as I change back to my red pen, and it says this. One difference between Japan and India when it came to the mechanization of the cotton industry was the gender of the workforce. For example, in a Japanese factory photo, one can only see female workers, not a male in sight. That's great evidence from that photo. That counts. It supports the thesis. Also, according to the chart of industrial data on Japanese women, by 1934, 80% of factory workers in Japan were female, while there were fewer female workers in India. The first part of document 7's evidence, the 80%, is really good. This part is not. It is too vague. What do we mean by fewer female workers? Does that mean only 78% of Indian women worked in factories? And if that's the case, that's actually more of a similarity. So this part of the evidence right here needed to be a lot more specific to count in order to support the thesis. It's just too vague. So had they said, while there are only 19% of female workers in India, then that evidence would have been strong. It would have supported the thesis. You'd be good to go. Now here, we also see, as I change back to my blue sourcing pen, we also see another attempt at sourcing. And they say one reason why females were more used in Japan was probably because all men had to serve a 2-year military service, which means men were not around to work in the factories. Now, that would count for historical context. It could be a little stronger, but it's okay. But they've already got 3 sourcings, and they say they don't need another sourcing. It doesn't benefit them. So, because there are specific facts in here, we can actually use this not as historical context, but we could use this as an outside knowledge point, because that is information that the student is bringing in from the outside to support why there were more female workers in Japan than in India, and that would totally count. So if we were to go back and count the points, we have credit for the thesis. Okay, so that's 1 point. We have credit for using all the documents. So that's 1 point. They didn't get credit for the second evidence point of using the evidence to support the thesis, because evidence from document 6 didn't support the thesis, and evidence from document 7 was too vague. And so they had to have evidence from 6 of the 7 documents. They only had 5 to support the thesis, so they can't earn the second evidence point. But they do earn the sourcing point, because they do have 3 sourcings, and they do earn the outside knowledge point. So that would give them a grand total of 4 out of 6, because I didn't grade complexity. So the only 2 points they didn't get were historical context, and using 6 or 7 of the documents, the evidence actually directly supports the thesis. So this would actually be a really good DBQ, especially being your first one if you had written this. So this is really good, because simply giving stronger evidence from the 2 of the documents would have gotten it to 5. Adding another sentence to your historical context would have gotten you to 6. So hopefully this video made sense, and it gave you a little bit more explanation or a little more insight how we grade the DBQs. If you have any more questions, always do not hesitate to ask, and I will see you next time.